guys, I'm Kristen. I blog at Rage Against the Minivan, and I'm here with Leslie Dixon, who is a sex educator. She works with Birds and Bees Connection, which does sex education for parents and kids here in Orange County. And we have been having an ongoing conversation about how to talk to kids about sex. So what are we delving into today?
Well, we've been having such great conversations.
Yeah.
And last week's was really the beginning of that teen years. And I thought, well, I'd like to share a little bit about my experience as a tween and what puberty was like for me.
Yeah, I haven't heard your story, and I'm imagining there's a story because you know, as an adult felt compelled to go into this field and teach kids.
Right.
So I assume that there's some
backstory.
Yeah.
There is a backstory, and thank you for saying that. It's true. I really think because of my story, that's where the inception came from, or at least the passion about it. So I was very, very young when I started to change. And the only thing I had when I probably was in 5th grade was the movie from Disney that had Jiminy Cricket. And I think I've said this, I don't know what Jiminy Cricket could say to me about puberty, because he was a boy cricket and I was a girl.
Yes.
And I walked out of there thinking, this is pretty crazy. But even before that, my body started changing. And it's always that funny looking down at your flat chest and all of a sudden you're seeing bumps there. And it was like my body started to take over. And we're talking about 9 years of age when I started to change. And it was very traumatic, and I didn't have anyone to go to. Again, my mother was from the generation, no one talked to them, and she didn't know what to say to me. I didn't get a book, I didn't get a conversation, I got Jiminy Cricket, and my body started to change, and I had no one to go to. And I clearly remember what that experience was like. Having these changes happen and not having anyone to talk to. And it's not like I had peers to talk to, because I was way before the peers, and we didn't have social media.
Right.
So it was me against the world. And it was so young, and I was so uncomfortable with my body. And I was uncomfortable with my body anyway. I always felt fat. I didn't feel comfortable in my body. I never had an easy experience with my body at all. And then I said, things started to change dramatically, and I didn't have any idea what it was all about. And then I went off to Girl Scout camp, and I was probably 10 years old. And I remember going to the bathroom, and what did I see? Blood. And I sort of knew what the whole thing was, but I didn't. And then who do I talk to? I was so embarrassed. And remember we talked about shame?
Yeah.
Oh, shame was all over the place, because I didn't have anyone to explain to me that this was perfectly normal.
And you have no idea what's going on.
I had no idea.
And blood is really scary.
Yes, it was scary.
Yeah.
And it was coming out of me.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize what it was all about, and I had no one to go to. And I just literally had to walk around and do the best I could with this whole process, not being able to talk to anybody. And that's the way that experience went for me on Catalina Island, Girl Scout camp, and my first period. And I think after that, I pretty well just sort of went numb about the whole experience of my body going through all these changes. And on top of it all, I had really bad cramps, really bad cramps. So couldn't talk to anybody. And then finally my mother figured it out. Well, back then, we didn't have sticky backings on our sanitary pad. We had these funky looking belts.
Which I knew about from reading Judy Blume.
That's right.
Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret.
That's right. And I even show them in my class because I want those young people to know how lucky they are that they don't have to deal with these belts and pads that really did feel like, you know, diapers.
Yeah.
And the whole experience, it was shaming and it was uncomfortable, and I had no one to talk to. And there were a lot of also issues in my childhood that weren't very positive at all. So everything converged about being a young person and my body changing so dramatically, and I had no one to talk to, and I entered puberty young. And then I think I shut down my sexuality at that point. I don't think I owned it or felt comfortable in my body. You know, obsolete body issues were definitely an issue. You know, mine is eating, absolutely, and it still is. So this was a time in my life, and then going into my teen years, when we definitely didn't talk about sex. There was no talk about it. Now, being realistic, who was doing it? The cheerleaders were doing it. I'm sure there were others, but we never even talked about it. Forget some kind of class. Forget a parent talking about it. I didn't have a clue, and I just remember going out on dates and feeling so inadequate about what was happening. Somehow the guys knew what to do.
Yeah.
But I didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
But I still was having sexual feelings.
Sure.
That wasn't turned off. I still had those feelings, but shame, confusion, and no knowledge about what to do.
Yeah.
And the knowledge, to be perfectly honest, didn't come until nursing school.
Yeah.
And I had relationships, and I was a real fish out of water. And it really impacted all the way through my sexuality, how I felt about my body, how I felt about sexuality, sex in general, because it wasn't a healthy experience. It wasn't, remember we talked about normalcy last week. There was no normalcy. You're right. All of this, when I became a nurse, and I became a school nurse, and I saw that I could relate to these young people, I think this is how it unfolded. And I guess the humor in it all is I feel comfortable talking about it in front of anyone, considering
full circle.
Considering how my childhood was. And if you would have told me back in high school, this is what would have happened, I wouldn't have believed you.
Well, I mean, having sat in on your classes more than once, you know, your passion and your comfort with the subject matter is clear, but I can also clearly see your excitement in empowering girls. Like, that is super clear.
Yes.
And because I think you know that when a girl walks out of the class, especially with her mom and maybe even some peers, that she's armed with information, which I think is hugely powerful.
Yes.
Now, my story, my mom was pretty open with me about periods, so I was prepared for that. No surprises. But I grew up, and part of the reason that I'm super interested in talking about sex and sexuality with kids and teens is both personal and professional. I grew up in a very religious, home, very religious, and so our conversations around sex were very negative. So it was just, don't do it. Don't have it. Wait until you're married. And then what happened after you were married was this sort of nebulous thing, and there was this idea that you were going to be rewarded, and that sex was amazing if you were married, but it was terrible if you weren't. But we also got a lot of messages around boys will want to have sex, and girls will have to figure out how to stop. So the message that I got, and I know that this is true for a lot of, still, but especially for women of my age, the message was that the girls are the brakes and the boys are the gas. And that, it's like I thought it was totally abnormal if, you were a girl and you had those feelings, and maybe you were actually the one who was initiating or wanting. And so that, I remember feeling a lot of shame around my own sexuality, because I was in situations where I wanted to be there and I wanted things to happen. And wow, I must be, a slut, a harlot, a Jezebel. I must be abnormal. I must be all these things because I have these feelings. And then nobody really talked to me. The only thing we ever heard around sex was intercourse. Sex was intercourse. So don't have sexual intercourse.
That's vaginal sex,
no adult that I recall ever in my childhood talked to me about oral sex or, you know, any other kind of sex, but specifically oral sex or petting or any of that was not discussed. And so, you know, what's unfortunate is that I think myself and many of my peers just viewed that very casually.
That was okay then. I mean, that's what you assumed, but that's what in your mind was okay.
You do make that jump when no one talks to you about
all the issues.
Right. You know, so then you're engaged in what is really adult sexual behavior.
Right.
Because no one's talked to you about it, and you think, well, this is an intercourse, so I'm technically not breaking the rules.
Right. And teenagers still have that mindset to a certain extent.
Very much. I mean, I actually think it might be even more so now with the advent of porn. And I think kids are very casual about that kind of stuff. So, you know, when we have conversations with our kids, it's very much like all of this is very intimate and vulnerable.
Right.
All of this is not something that you want to be casual about. And then, you know, from my professional experience, you know, I was a marriage and family therapist for many years, and I saw so many people struggling with their sexuality. I mean, if you do marital therapy at all, that's going to come up.
Exactly.
And just the baggage that people carry around from a lack of information, from shame, so much shame in their childhood, whether it be from overly religious parents. And hear me say, I don't want to say that religious parents are always shameful or that teaching abstinence is always shaming.
Right.
But I do think that many of us grew up in environments where it was shaming. A friend of mine, Sarah Bessie, wrote an incredible post about this kind of purity culture legacy and how she was at a youth group function, and a youth pastor passed around a cup and had everyone spit in it. And when he got the cup back, he said, if you've had sex with, you know, more men than your husband, you're like this cup.
Right.
Or a piece of chewed up chewing gum. And we were raised with all these sort of terrible analogies about how you were ruined.
Right.
If you engaged in sex.
Right.
And I cannot tell you how many people I saw in my office that were, you know, so filled with shame and issue in their sexuality, or maybe, you know, maybe they passed that, you know, that threshold and didn't have sex till they were married, but then they had all the shame around sex because you don't automatically become sex positive
after all those years
of feeling shame.
Right.
And so this is a big area of passion for me too.
Yes.
And I, you know, as a Christian, I want to figure out how we do it that better too.
And a sex educator, there is that coming together. And I have to agree, is in many of my classes, I know that the moms and the dads are really uncomfortable with this topic. And I give them so much credit for being there. And after the classes, I can almost see them, along with their children, breathe easier because they're, again, that word normalcy comes in these rooms where we talk about it, we demystify it, we laugh over it, and it isn't this big white pink elephant in the room that no one wants to talk about. And I think the more we talk about it, and the more we bring normalcy to it, like we're doing here, it's so important to the health of the child and the ongoing health of the child and the parent as well, because I think there's healing that takes place in my rooms when parents do find a way to deal with old wounds around the topic of sexuality. Because it really is normal. It's healthy. And to have a healthy sexual, life is really what we're here for.
Absolutely. And I think, it's so important, especially, if there's Christian parents watching, I think it's important to differentiate sex education and sexual ethic education because those are two different things.
Right.
And so as Christians, we don't skimp on the sex education, because that doesn't change their sexual ethic.
Right.
I think we think that. Well, I won't talk about these things because I don't want them to engage in them.
Right.
But we still, as Christian parents, even if your goal is for your child to wait until they're married to have sex, you still need to talk about birth control, consent, all of the different kinds of sex.
Right.
oral sex, anal sex, vaginal sex, they need to know what everything is. They've got to know what everything is. You're doing them a disservice. You present that information, and then separately you can have a conversation about sexual ethics, which is, okay, now you know what all of this is,
right? And
let's talk about how you want to prepare yourself.
Right.
And then, I love that you talk about normalization, because regardless of what goals that we hope our children set for the sexuality, we can't set them as parents. Our kids set them,
right?
And then follow them or don't. But regardless of what ethics that they kind of come up with, it's really important for us to normalize. So even if you decide, I'm going to wait till marriage, that kind of a thing, it's still normal that you feel sexual feelings.
Right.
It's still normal and okay that you feel like having sex.
Right.
That's okay.
And I think the more we talk about it, the more young people feel comfortable. I think so many times, because of how parents feel, society, that we sort of feel that there's all these taboos, that they can't feel comfortable in their own body. But as they enter puberty, there's this confusion, because again, they're hardwired to have these feelings.
Right.
And if we don't have conversations with them,
Yeah.
and if we don't have that normalcy about it, then they're confused, and that's when the acting out happens.
Yeah.
Because they don't have the parameters, they don't have the right information. And we've talked about over and over again about where do they go to. Oftentimes they go to their peers, they'll go to social media, or they'll go to pornography. And that's what we're seeing more and more, and that changes everything.
Yes.
And I think as we have these conversations, part of these conversations is to help parents to have the language, to have the comfort. Look at us. We're sitting here with both of our backgrounds and having these conversations, and we really want to share it with parents so you have this comfort. You're able to talk to your children. And the other piece is your morals, your values. It's the balance of being able to give them the information so they are empowered and educated, and they also know about your feelings and your morals and values. The important thing is to listen to what they're feeling, because I think that's important as well, is be very sensitive to what they're experiencing and what they're getting from their outside world.
And we've said this over and over again, but the earlier the better. Right. If you can talk to them before they're in these experiences, they're going to be much more comfortable.
Right.
I appreciated what you said too about hardwiring. I mean, the truth is we are all sexual beings. Biologically, bad news, your kids will be sexual beings.
Yep.
They already are. There's nothing you can do to stop that. And so their sexual feelings are not a question of if, but when. Your kids will have sexual feelings as teenagers. They will. Biologically, they are set up to have those sexual feelings way younger than you want them to.
Right.
So it's so important that we're talking to our kids about what they do with those feelings, because they will happen.
Well, when we're talking about puberty starting younger, this is a hormonal thing, this is a biological thing, and I think you're right, it is starting younger, and also what they see visually. Many of the researchers say that young people are becoming sexualized at a much younger age. Well, if that's true, then again, this conversation is really, really important. And yes, we've talked about it is important to talk to them as early as possible, but it's never too late. And that's important to know. So, again, how can you as a parent become comfortable with these, topics, with these conversations? And I think both Kristen and I have always start easy. Keep repeating, keep, saying it over again, but really less is more, and find out what they know, these basics, to open the door for these ongoing conversations.
We have to go for today, but someone left a really interesting comment, which is, I feel like my attempt to normalize comes off as permissive. And I think that might be a fascinating place to start next week. Because I know I've had some of the same concerns too. How do I teach my kids how to use birth control if I don't actually want them to use birth control?
Right.
Or how do I normalize their sexual feelings without saying, okay, so it's normal, go out and have sex. So maybe we can start there next week. How we talk to our kids about and arm them with everything they need to know, but then also help them establish a healthy sexual ethic or morality. And this is not just for religious families, because even if you don't have any feelings about sexuality in terms of religion, I think most of us would feel like I would be excited for my kid to delay.
Right.
I would be excited for my kid to wait a little longer. I would be excited for my kid to be more thoughtful, to have consensual sex, to not be, too casual in the way that they approach sex. So maybe next week we can talk about
absolutely
how we help our kids.
And there are answers and solutions to this, and so come back next week and we'll cover that.
That sounds good. All right.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys.